The crystalline spires of the Zephyrian capital world gleamed under twin suns, their surfaces reflecting the desperate beauty of a civilization on the brink of extinction. Queen Lysara stood motionless on her throne room's observation deck, her forearms trembling as she watched the darkening sky. Above her world, the Void Swarm had arrived. The enemy ships blotted out the stars like a plague of metallic locusts. Each vessel pulsed with an unholy crimson light, their biomechanical hulls writhing with tentacles that could tear through reinforced titanium as easily as wet paper. The Devourers had consumed 47 worlds in the past 3 cycles, leaving nothing but barren rocks stripped of all life. My queen, General Kithron, approached with measured steps, his scaled hide showing the battle scars of countless campaigns. Our fleet stands ready, but the enemy outnumbers us 50 to 1. Even with our plasma cannons and quantum shields, we cannot hold them for more than a few rotations. Lysara's mandibles clicked in frustration. The Zephyrian Empire had once ruled over 200 star systems, their advanced technology and tactical prowess making them the dominant force in this spiral arm of the galaxy. But the Void Swarm was different. These creatures didn't seek conquest or resources, they existed only to consume, to strip entire worlds of every living cell until nothing remained. What word from the Galactic Council? She asked, though she already knew the answer from Kithron's expression. The Corvan hegemony claims their fleets are engaged elsewhere. The Crystalline Confederacy offers prayers but no ships. The hive minds of Arcturus have gone silent. Kithron's voice carried the weight of abandonment. We stand alone, my queen. A massive explosion bloomed in the upper atmosphere as one of the orbital defense platforms was overwhelmed. Debris rained down like burning stars, and Lysara felt the ancient stones beneath her feet vibrate with the impact. Soon, the enemy would break through the planetary shields. There is one option, Kithron said hesitantly. The humans. Lysara's compound eyes widened. The primitives from the Third Arm? But they've only just achieved faster than light travel. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Yes, but... Kithron pulled up a holographic display showing battle reports from the Rim worlds. 3 cycles ago, a human exploration vessel encountered a Devourer scout ship near the Kepler Nebula. The humans were outgunned, outmanned, and their ship was barely held together with what they called duct tape and prayer. But, somehow, they not only survived, they destroyed the enemy vessel. The Queen studied the tactical readouts with growing interest. The human ship had used unconventional tactics, ramming maneuvers that should have been suicidal, and weapons that seemed to violate several laws of physics. Most remarkably, when their main engines failed, they had somehow rigged their waste recycling system to create a makeshift thruster that allowed them to escape. Since then, Kithron continued, every report we receive about these humans defies logical explanation. They fight with a ferocity that borders on madness, and they never surrender. Never. Even when facing impossible odds, they find ways to turn defeat into victory. Another explosion shook the palace, closer this time. Through the transparent walls, Lysara could see the first wave of Devourer drop pods burning through the atmosphere like falling comets. Send the message, she decided. Broadcast on all human frequencies. Tell them that Queen Lysara of the Zephyrian Empire formally requests assistance against the Void Swarm. Offer them full access to our technology archives and territorial rights to any systems they help us liberate. Kithron bowed deeply. It shall be done, my queen. Though I must warn you, our long-range sensors indicate the nearest human vessel is in the Sol system. Even at maximum velocity, it would take them 12 rotations to reach us. Then, we must hold for 12 rotations, Lysara said with grim determination. Alert all military commanders. Implement Defense Protocol Omega. Every citizen capable of holding a weapon will be armed. We will make the Devourers pay for every inch of ground. As Kithron rushed to carry out her orders, Lysara remained on the observation deck, watching the first Devourer ships breach the upper atmosphere. The creatures within those vessels were nightmares given form, beings of twisted flesh and metal that fed on terror as much as biological matter. They had faced down the greatest military powers in the galaxy without ever suffering a defeat. But they had never faced humans. The transmission array deep beneath the palace hummed to life, sending Lysara's message racing across the void at faster than light speeds. The quantum-encoded signal would reach Earth in mere hours, carrying with it the desperate hope of an entire species. On the surface, the first battles had already begun. Zephyrian warriors, their bodies encased in powered armor that gleamed like mercury, engaged the Devourer shock troops in the streets of the capital city. Plasma bolts lit up the evening sky as defenders fell back from intersection to intersection, their orderly retreat covering the evacuation of civilians to underground bunkers. Lysara watched a squad of her finest soldiers make their final stand at the great bridge spanning the Crystal River. They fought with honor and tactical precision, their weapons carving through the enemy ranks with disciplined volleys. But, for every devourer they destroyed, 3 more took its place. The creatures seemed to emerge from the very shadows, their adaptive biology allowing them to shrug off wounds that would cripple lesser beings. My queen, her personal aide HFY, approached with urgent news. Communications reports an acknowledgement from the Sol system. The humans have received our message. What was their response? HFY's feathered crest fluttered with what might have been nervous excitement. 3 words, transmitted on all frequencies: we are coming. Despite everything, Lysara felt a flutter of hope in her chest. Perhaps these primitive beings possessed something that all the advanced civilizations in the galaxy had lost in their pursuit of technological perfection. Perhaps they still remembered what it meant to fight not just for survival, but for the very right to exist. The battle raged through the night as Zephyrian forces conducted a fighting withdrawal toward the inner city. Every building became a fortress, every street a killing ground. The Devourers advanced with relentless efficiency, their biomechanical forms adapting to each new defensive strategy within hours of first contact. By dawn, the outer districts had fallen. The palace itself was now within range of enemy artillery, and the building shuddered under the impact of organic missiles that burst like rotten fruit against its shields. Lysara had moved to the military command center deep underground, where holographic displays showed the steadily shrinking perimeter of controlled territory. Status report, she demanded as General Kithron entered the chamber, his armor scored and blackened from personal combat. We've lost 60% of our ground forces. The eastern defensive line has collapsed, and the enemy has established breeding pools in the industrial sector. At current rates of attrition, we have perhaps 3 rotations before total planetary saturation. Lysara nodded grimly. She had studied the reports from other worlds that had fallen to the Void Swarm. Once the Devourers established their breeding pools, they began converting organic matter at an exponential rate. The very atmosphere would become toxic within hours. Any word from the humans? Long-range sensors detect multiple faster-than-light signatures approaching from the direction of the Sol system. But, my queen. Kithron hesitated. The number of vessels appears to be significantly smaller than we hoped. Perhaps 12 ships at most. 12 ships against a swarm that numbered in the thousands. Even with alien technology, it seemed an impossible task. But Lysara had learned not to underestimate species that had survived against overwhelming odds. The humans had crawled up from a world filled with predators and natural disasters, had somehow avoided destroying themselves with primitive nuclear weapons, and had reached for the stars despite having no natural advantages beyond stubborn determination. Patch me through to their lead vessel when they arrive in system, she ordered. I want to speak with their commander personally. The wait stretched into hours as the tactical situation continued to deteriorate. The Devourers had broken through the inner defensive ring in 3 places, and their biomechanical spores were beginning to contaminate the water supply. Zephyrian civilians huddled in deep shelters while their protectors made increasingly desperate stands against an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each victory. Then, suddenly, the long-range sensors detected the emergence of human vessels at the edge of the star system. The ships that dropped out of faster-than-light travel were unlike anything in Lysara's experience. They weren't elegant or beautiful like Zephyrian vessels, nor were they massive and imposing like the war barges of other galactic powers. The human ships looked like they had been built in a scrapyard by someone who had only vague memories of what a spaceship should look like. They were asymmetrical, covered in random protrusions and antenna arrays, and several appeared to be held together with what the humans called space tape. But something about their presence made the quantum foam itself seem to recoil. Incoming transmission, the communications officer announced. Audio only, heavy static. Put them through. The voice that emerged from the speakers was rough, gravelly, and carried an accent that the translation matrix struggled to parse. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Force vessel Indomitable. We received your distress call, Your Majesty. Sorry we're late to the party, but we brought party favors." Lysara felt her mandibles twitch in what might have been amusement. "Admiral Morrison, I must warn you that you face an enemy unlike any in recorded galactic history. The Void Swarm has consumed 47 worlds. They number in the thousands, and their technology adapts to counter any strategy within hours of first contact." There was a pause, filled with what sounded like humans arguing in the background. Then, Morrison's voice returned, and Lysara could swear she heard laughter in it. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, you obviously haven't met humans before. We specialize in impossible odds." Morrison out. The transmission ended, and Lysara found herself staring at the tactical display as 12 human vessels, impossibly small against the massive Devourer fleet, began their approach toward the planet. She had called for salvation and received what appeared to be a cosmic joke. But, as she watched those ramshackle human ships begin to accelerate toward certain death, she felt something she hadn't experienced in cycles: genuine hope. Perhaps there was something to be said for a species too stupid to know when they were beaten. The first human ship entered weapons range of the Devourer fleet, and the real battle was about to begin. The human fleet engages the impossible. The first human vessel to enter the combat zone was a battered freighter that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and sheer willpower. Its hull was patchwork metal plates welded over blast holes, and one of its engine nacelles was visibly held in place with what appeared to be steel cable. The ship's name, painted in crude letters across its bow, read Murphy's Revenge. Admiral Morrison's voice crackled over the communication array as his fleet spread into what military analysts would later describe as the most unconventional battle formation in recorded history. "All right, people, you know the drill. The ugly sons of bitches down there have never tangled with humans before, so let's give them a proper introduction to terra firma hospitality." The Devourer fleet responded to the human presence with typical efficiency. Massive bioships, each one larger than a city block, turned their attention from the dying planet below to focus on these new arrivals. Organic cannons that fired concentrated acid and metallic spines the size of starship hulls began tracking the approaching human vessels. In the command center beneath the Zephyrian Palace, Queen Lysara watched the tactical display with growing disbelief. The human ships weren't following any recognized combat doctrine. Instead of maintaining formation and concentrating their firepower, they scattered like leaves in a hurricane, each vessel taking a seemingly random course toward the enemy fleet. "What are they doing?" General Kithron muttered, his scaled hide reflecting the harsh light of the holographic projectors. "This isn't a battle plan, it's organized chaos." The lead Devourer ship, a nightmare of writhing tentacles and pulsing organic armor, opened fire with its primary weapons. Streams of corrosive energy lanced out toward Murphy's Revenge, each bolt carrying enough destructive force to vaporize a heavy cruiser. But the human ship wasn't where the targeting computers expected it to be. Captain Saracen had spent 15 years smuggling medical supplies through pirate-infested space routes, and she knew exactly how to make a ship dance. Murphy's Revenge twisted through the incoming fire with movements that should have torn its superstructure apart, rolling and spinning in patterns that seemed to mock the laws of physics. "Take that, you tentacled bastards." Chen's voice echoed across the communication channels as her ship's jury-rigged weapons systems opened fire. The weapons themselves were an insult to military engineering, mining lasers that had been overcharged to the point of instability, construction tools that fired superheated plasma, and something that the crew had cheerfully nicknamed the kitchen sink cannon because it literally fired whatever happened to be loaded into the cargo bay. The improvised barrage struck the Devourer ship's forward sections, and, for a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, impossibly, sections of the biomechanical hull began to bubble and collapse. The mining lasers, designed to cut through asteroid rock, were apparently quite effective at disrupting the enemy's organic armor matrix. "All vessels, weapons free." Admiral Morrison's voice boomed across the fleet communication network. "Remember, these things adapt fast, so keep changing your attack patterns. And, for God's sake, don't let them get close enough to board you." "Sarah, nice shooting." The battle that followed was unlike anything in the recorded military history of the galaxy. Each human ship fought with its own unique style, using weapons and tactics that ranged from brilliant to completely insane. The destroyer Stalingrad, commanded by Captain Boris Volkov, had retrofitted its torpedo tubes to fire cargo containers packed with mining explosives. When a Devourer cruiser moved to intercept, Volkov calmly announced, "In Soviet Russia, cargo delivers you," before launching a spread of containers that detonated in sequence, creating a chain reaction that tore through the enemy's formation. Meanwhile, the converted research vessel New Horizons, under the command of Dr. Elizabeth Harper, was conducting what she called aggressive scientific experimentation on the enemy fleet. Her ship's modified sensor arrays were apparently capable of generating focused gravitational fields that caused the biomechanical ships to implode from within. Fascinating, Dr. Harper's calm voice contrasted sharply with the chaos around her. The enemy vessels appear to be vulnerable to rapid gravitational fluctuations. "I'm transmitting the frequency data to all ships now. This should prove most illuminating for our understanding of biomechanical engineering principles." As the human fleet carved through the outer edge of the Devourer formation, something unprecedented began to happen. The alien ships, which had adapted to counter every military strategy employed by galactic civilization, seemed unable to predict or counter the humans' chaotic approach to warfare. The problem, as Queen Lasara was beginning to understand, was that the Devourer's adaptive systems were designed to analyze and counter logical, disciplined military tactics. They could easily adapt to plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, and energy shields because these weapons followed predictable patterns based on sound engineering principles. But how do you adapt to a species that thinks retrofitting a garbage disposal unit into a close-range defensive weapon is perfectly reasonable? Captain Mike O'Brien of the cargo hauler Lucky Strike demonstrated this principle beautifully when a Devourer boarding pod attached itself to his ship's hull. Instead of following standard military protocol and fighting the creatures in the corridors, O'Brien simply dumped his cargo hold, which happened to be full of industrial adhesive, and then performed a barrel roll that flung the boarding pod and its occupants into the nearest enemy ship. "Problem solved," O'Brien announced cheerfully. "Though I'm definitely billing someone for that cargo. Do you think alien queens accept credit cards?" The tide of the space battle was turning, but down on the planet's surface, the situation remained desperate. The Devourers had established their breeding pools throughout the capital city, and the air itself was beginning to shimmer with toxic spores. Zephyrian defenders, now reduced to small pockets of resistance, were running low on both ammunition and hope. That's when Admiral Morrison made a decision that would be studied in military academies for centuries to come. "All vessels, this is Admiral Morrison. We're taking the fight to the surface. I want volunteer crews for atmospheric assault. Fair warning, this is going to be bumpy, and I can't guarantee we'll all make it home." Every single human captain volunteered. The sight of 12 human vessels plunging through the planet's atmosphere toward the Devourer-infested surface was something that would haunt the survivors' dreams for years to come. The ships weren't designed for atmospheric flight, and several were barely holding together as they descended through the toxic clouds. But they came anyway. Murphy's Revenge was the first to reach the surface, crash-landing in the central plaza with enough force to create a crater. As Devourer forces swarmed toward the wreckage, expecting to find corpses, they instead encountered Captain Chen and her crew emerging from the smoking hull with weapons that definitely hadn't been in the ship's original armament. "Honey, I'm home," Chen announced to the assembled aliens before opening fire with what appeared to be a flamethrower that shot liquid nitrogen. The Devourers, whose adaptive biology was designed to handle extreme temperatures, found themselves flash-frozen before they could adjust. The other human vessels followed suit, turning the battle for the capital into a chaotic melee that defied every military textbook ever written. The crew of the New Horizons had somehow managed to convert their ship's research equipment into weapons that fired concentrated doses of Earth bacteria, causing the Devourer bioships to suffer what Dr. Harper cheerfully described as acute indigestion. Captain Volkov's crew from the Stalingrad had brought along their ship's emergency rations, which apparently included something called military-grade hot sauce that was toxic to organic compounds. They were literally poisoning enemy forces with condiments. But it was the crew of the light cruiser Defiance that achieved what military historians would later term the most creative tactical victory in recorded history. Commander Lisa Park had noticed that the Devourer breeding pools required specific environmental conditions to maintain their biological processes. So she crashed her ship directly into the largest breeding facility and detonated her reactor core. The explosion didn't just destroy the facility, it created an electromagnetic pulse that disrupted the bioelectrical systems of every devourer creature within a 50-kilometer radius. The entire enemy force suddenly found itself blind, deaf, and unable to coordinate their movements. All ground teams, this is Commander Park, her voice crackled over the communication system from somewhere in the rubble. I've given you a window, but it won't last long. Hit them now while they're stunned. The remaining human forces, supported by the surviving Zephyrian defenders, launched a coordinated assault on the confused enemy forces. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't sophisticated, but it was devastatingly effective. The humans fought with a ferocity that seemed to border on madness. They used makeshift weapons, improvised explosives, and tactics that would have made their military instructors weep. When they ran out of ammunition, they used rocks. When they ran out of rocks, they used harsh language and creative cursing that apparently had psychological effects on telepathic species. Sergeant Maria Santos of the Terran Marines demonstrated her unit's philosophy when she tackled a devourer warrior twice her size, armed with nothing but a combat knife and what she later described as pure, concentrated spite. "Come on, ugly," she taunted as she dodged the creature's flailing tentacles. "I've seen scarier things in my grandmother's basement." In the command bunker, Queen Lysara watched the tactical display transform from hopeless defeat to impossible victory. The human forces, outnumbered and outgunned, were somehow pushing the devourers back through sheer audacity and what could only be described as weaponized stubbornness. "General Kithron," she said quietly, "I believe we may have seriously underestimated our new allies." Kithron could only nod as he watched a human engineer use a welding torch to hold off 3 devourer shock troops while loudly singing what the translation matrix identified as an ancient war song about a mythical figure named Chuck Norris. The battle raged for another 6 hours before the devourer forces, faced with an enemy they literally could not understand or adapt to, did something unprecedented in their species' history: they retreated. The surviving bioships launched themselves from the planet's surface and fled toward deep space, leaving behind their breeding pools and ground forces. The orbital fleet, what remained of it, followed suit, disappearing into faster-than-light travel with a speed that suggested panic rather than tactical withdrawal. As the last enemy vessel vanished from the sensors, an eerie silence fell over the battlefield. The humans, many of them wounded and all of them exhausted, stood among the wreckage of their impossible victory. "Well," Admiral Morrison's voice echoed across the communication network, "that was fun. Anyone know where we can get spare parts and a decent cup of coffee?" 3 cycles had passed since the Battle of Zephyria Prime, and the galaxy was still trying to process what had happened. The Void Swarm, an unstoppable force that had consumed 47 worlds without suffering a single defeat, had been driven away by 12 human vessels held together with what Admiral Morrison had cheerfully described as spit, prayer, and engineering violations. Queen Lysara stood in the rebuilt throne room of her palace, gazing out at a city that bore the scars of impossible victory. The humans had refused most of the territorial rewards she had promised, instead asking only for friendship, trading rights, and maybe some of those really good crystal fruits from your southern continent. They had also requested detailed technical specifications for Zephyrian shield technology, which they claimed they wanted to modify for atmospheric racing. The thought of humans using advanced defensive systems for recreational purposes should have been terrifying. Instead, Lysara found it oddly comforting. "My queen," General Kithron approached with his usual measured gait, though his posture seemed somehow lighter than it had in years. "The Galactic Council has requested an emergency session to discuss the human situation." Lysara's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Let me guess. They want to know how we convinced a species they've never heard of to intervene in a hopeless battle? That, and they're receiving reports from across the galaxy about other human activities. It seems our new allies have been busy." Kithron activated a holographic display that showed the current galactic map. What Lysara saw made her compound eyes widen in surprise. Red markers indicated human presence in dozens of star systems, many of them in sectors that had been considered too dangerous for civilized exploration. Here, Kithron pointed to a cluster of markers near the Void Nebula. The research vessel Carl Sagan made first contact with the Crystalline Confederacy 3 weeks ago. The humans apparently impressed them by successfully communicating through mathematical equations carved into asteroids. And, here, he gestured to another region, the cargo hauler Serenity discovered a previously unknown trade route through the Corvan hegemony's territory. They're now running regular supply runs to isolated colonies that haven't seen outside contact in generations. But, it was the markers in the galactic rim that truly caught Lysara's attention. What are they doing out there? That's unexplored space. According to long-range communications, Captain Chen's Murphy's Revenge encountered a devourer breeding world. Instead of reporting it to galactic authorities and waiting for a military response, Kithron paused, as if he still couldn't believe what he was about to say. She apparently convinced the local wildlife to help her destroy the facility. The local wildlife? Space whales, my queen. Massive creatures that feed on the same bioenergy the devourers use for their technology. Captain Chen somehow communicated with them and convinced them to attack the breeding facility. The official report mentions something about interspecies cooperation and the universal language of kicking ass. Lysara felt that familiar flutter of amusement mixed with bewilderment that seemed to accompany every human-related report. These beings didn't just break the rules of conventional warfare, they apparently broke the rules of conventional everything. What does the Council want from us? She asked. They want to understand how humans fight. More specifically, they want to know if human military tactics can be taught to other species. Kithron's crest feathers ruffled with what might have been nervous laughter. I suspect they're hoping to create their own version of human-style warriors. The idea of the galaxy's most sophisticated civilizations trying to train their military forces to fight like humans was so absurd that Lysara had to resist the urge to laugh out loud. These were species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of logical, disciplined warfare, and now they wanted to learn how to weaponize chaos. Schedule a meeting with Admiral Morrison, she decided. I suspect he'll find the Council's request amusing. The meeting took place 2 rotations later in the newly constructed human embassy, a building that looked like it had been designed by someone who had never seen architecture before but had very strong opinions about what buildings should look like. The walls were painted in colors that hurt Lysara's eyes, and the furniture appeared to be held together with the same mysterious duct tape that the humans used for everything else. Admiral Morrison greeted her wearing what he called a dress uniform, which consisted of a jacket that almost matched his pants, boots that had been polished to a reflective shine, and a hat that seemed to exist solely to be removed and held during formal conversations. Your Majesty, he said, executing a bow that would have been perfect if he hadn't winked at her during it. I hear the galactic bigwigs want to learn our secrets. The Galactic Council is concerned about future devourer incursions, Lysara explained diplomatically. They believe that human tactical methods might provide an advantage that traditional military doctrine cannot. Morrison's weathered face split into a grin that made her nervous. Well, that's flattering and all, but I'm not sure they really understand what they're asking for. Human military tactics aren't something you can learn from a textbook. What do you mean? Come on, let me show you something. Morrison led her to a window overlooking the embassy's rear courtyard, where a group of human soldiers were conducting what they called training exercises with a squad of volunteer Zephyrian warriors. What Lysara saw defied every principle of military training she had ever learned. The humans weren't teaching formation fighting or weapons drill. Instead, they appeared to be engaged in something called Capture the Flag that involved a lot of running, shouting, and creative uses of environmental obstacles. See that? Morrison pointed to a young human who had just swung from a tree branch to tackle a Zephyrian warrior twice his size. Private Johnson there failed every tactical simulation in basic training. Couldn't follow orders, couldn't work as part of a team, couldn't even march in a straight line. But put him in a real fight, and he'll find 17 ways to win using nothing but a paperclip and aggressive attitude. As they watched, the Zephyrian forces, despite their superior size and strength, were being systematically outmaneuvered by humans who seemed to treat the entire exercise as an elaborate game. The aliens tried to approach the mock battle with disciplined tactics and coordinated movements. The humans responded by hiding in trees, digging holes, and apparently convincing the embassy's maintenance robots to create diversions. Your people fight like they're insane, Lysara observed. Nah, Morrison replied cheerfully. We fight like we're desperate. There's a difference. I don't understand. Morrison's expression grew more serious, though his eyes still held their characteristic humor. Your Majesty, every species in this galaxy developed on worlds that were relatively safe and stable. Sure, you had your challenges and conflicts, but you never faced extinction as a daily possibility. Humans come from a world that spent millions of years trying to kill us in every way imaginable. He gestured toward the soldiers in the courtyard. Our ancestors survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, predators that hunted us for sport, diseases that could wipe out entire populations, and natural disasters that would make a void swarm attack look like a minor inconvenience. We learned to adapt, improvise, and keep fighting even when logic said we should just lie down and die. But surely other species have faced similar challenges? Maybe, but here's the thing that makes humans different, Morrison's grin returned. We never learned when to quit. Every other species in the galaxy developed enough intelligence to recognize hopeless situations and retreat to fight another day. Humans? We just get stubborn and start looking for ways to turn impossible odds into somebody else's problem. To illustrate his point, a commotion erupted in the courtyard as Private Johnson, having been cornered by superior forces, apparently convinced the embassy's sprinkler system to activate, creating enough confusion for his team to capture the flag while their opponents were trying to figure out why it was raining indoors. The Galactic Council wants to bottle that, Morrison continued. They want to create training programs that will teach their people to think like humans. Problem is, you can't train instincts that took millions of years to evolve. Our approach to warfare isn't a technique, it's a survival trait. Lysara watched as the Zephyrian soldiers, despite being thoroughly defeated, were shaking hands with their human counterparts and laughing about the experience. There was no shame in their defeat, only genuine appreciation for having learned something new. What would you recommend we tell the council? She asked. Tell them the truth, Morrison replied. Humans don't fight the way we do because we're brilliant tacticians or superior warriors. We fight like this because our planet spent millions of years teaching us that the universe is actively trying to kill us, and the only proper response is to refuse to cooperate with that plan. And if they insist on trying to learn human tactics? Morrison shrugged. Let them try. Might do them some good to loosen up a little. But they should know that the real secret isn't in our tactics or our technology. It's in our attitude. Which is? When faced with an impossible situation, most species ask, how do we survive this? Humans ask, how do we make this impossible situation everyone else's problem? It's a subtle but important difference. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was held on the neutral station Harmony 1, a massive construct that orbited a star halfway between the major galactic powers. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall, their attention focused on the modest human delegation that sat in the section previously reserved for minor species. Admiral Morrison had insisted on representing humanity himself, despite diplomatic suggestions that perhaps a more traditional ambassador might be appropriate. He sat in the witness chair wearing his least wrinkled uniform and an expression that suggested he was enjoying himself immensely. Admiral Morrison, the council speaker, a tall, ethereal being from the Crystalline Confederacy, addressed him with the formal tones reserved for matters of galactic importance. We have gathered here to discuss the unprecedented victory at Zephyria Prime and its implications for galactic security. Happy to help, Morrison replied cheerfully. Though I should mention up front that if you're looking for trade secrets or technical specifications, you're probably going to be disappointed. A murmur of confusion rippled through the assembly. The representative from the Corvan hegemony, a being that looked like an upright rhinoceros crossed with a filing cabinet, spoke up. Admiral, our analysis indicates that human vessels achieved victory through the use of previously unknown weapons technologies and tactical innovations. Surely you can share these advances with the galactic community? Morrison scratched his chin thoughtfully. Well, let's see. Captain Chen defeated a devourer boarding party using a fire extinguisher and a really bad attitude. Dr. Harper discovered that alien bioships are vulnerable to common Earth bacteria, which she deployed using a modified coffee maker. And Commander Park saved the day by crashing her ship into the enemy base and setting off her reactor, which wasn't so much a tactical innovation as it was a really spectacular tantrum. The silence that followed this explanation was profound. The speaker tried again. Admiral, surely there must be underlying principles that can be codified and taught to other military forces? Oh, sure, Morrison nodded enthusiastically. Rule 1, when in doubt, hit it with something heavy. Rule 2, if that doesn't work, hit it with something heavier. Rule 3, if you run out of heavy things, get creative and hit it with something unexpected. That's not really a military doctrine, observed the representative from the hive minds of Arcturus, whose telepathic voice carried undertones of bewilderment. Exactly. Morrison agreed. That's why it works. Military doctrine is predictable. The Devourers adapted to every conventional strategy because conventional strategies follow logical patterns. Humans don't follow logical patterns. We follow whatever pattern seems likely to annoy the enemy the most. Queen Lasara, who had been granted observer status for the session, found herself speaking up. If I may, she said, drawing the assembly's attention. I believe Admiral Morrison is trying to explain that human tactical superiority isn't based on technology or training. It's based on psychology. Psychology? The speaker inquired. Humans don't just fight to win, Lasara continued, choosing her words carefully. They fight to prove that losing is unacceptable. When faced with impossible odds, they don't calculate probability of success. They calculate how much damage they can inflict while refusing to give up. Morrison beamed at her as if she were a particularly bright student. See? She gets it. We don't fight smarter, we fight more stubborn. The council session continued for several more hours, with representatives attempting to understand the nature of human warfare through the lens of their own military traditions. The more Morrison explained human tactics, the more confused the assembly became. How do you counter an enemy that uses garbage disposals as weapons? How do you predict the movements of forces that use recreational vehicles as assault craft? How do you adapt to tactics based on the principle that anything can be a weapon if you're creative enough? Finally, the speaker called for a recess to allow the representatives to caucus and discuss what they had learned. Morrison used the break to wander over to Queen Lasara's observation section. How do you think it's going? He asked. They're terrified, Lasara replied honestly. They came here hoping to learn how to fight like humans, and instead they've learned that fighting like humans requires being human. Pretty much, yeah. Though I think they're missing the bigger picture. Which is? Morrison's expression grew unexpectedly serious. The Void Swarm isn't gone, Your Majesty. They're out there somewhere, adapting to what they learned about us. Next time we meet them, they'll be ready for human tactics. Lasara felt a chill run through her exoskeleton. Then, what do we do? Morrison's grin returned in full force. We adapt too. See, that's another thing about humans, we don't just refuse to lose, we refuse to fight the same battle twice. By the time those tentacled bastards figure out how to counter our current tricks, we'll have invented entirely new ways to make their lives miserable. And the rest of the galaxy? Well, that's up to them. Morrison gestured toward the assembly hall where representatives were engaged in heated discussions about the implications of human military philosophy. They can keep trying to turn warfare into a science, or they can start treating it like an art form. Either way, the next time the Devourers show up, they're going to find a galaxy that's learned to fight dirty. When the session reconvened, the council reached a unanimous decision that surprised no one who had been paying attention. Rather than attempting to replicate human military doctrine, they would establish the Galactic Defense Initiative, a rapid response force that would coordinate the unique strengths of each species against future threats. The humans would serve as tactical consultants, which Morrison accurately translated as the people we call when we need something blown up in a creative fashion. The Zephyrians would provide advanced technology and logistical support. The Crystalline Confederacy would handle communications and intelligence gathering. Other species would contribute according to their own abilities and resources. So basically, Morrison summarized after the formal agreements were signed, we're forming the galaxy's most dysfunctional military alliance, based on the principle that our enemies can't predict what we're going to do if we don't know what we're going to do ourselves. Is that wise? Asked the speaker. Probably not, Morrison admitted cheerfully. But it'll be fun, and that's what really matters. 6 months later, the first test of the new alliance came when Devourer scouts were detected in the Outer Rim. The response was swift and, by any conventional measure, completely insane. A combined fleet of human, Zephyrian, and allied vessels converged on the enemy position using tactics that defied every known principle of space combat. Human ships served as chaotic distractions while Zephyrian vessels provided precision strikes. Crystalline Confederacy vessels coordinated the attack through quantum-encrypted communications, while other species contributed their own unique capabilities to the mix. The Devourers, who had spent months adapting to counter-human tactics, found themselves facing an enemy that combined human unpredictability with alien precision. Instead of 12 ships held together with hope and duct tape, they faced a coordinated fleet that fought like humans but fought like the entire galaxy. The result was so devastating that the surviving Devourer vessels retreated to whatever dark corner of the universe had spawned them, and galactic intelligence agencies lost track of them entirely. In the aftermath of what historians would call the Battle of the Shattered Nebula, Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of his newest command, the UES Terra Firma, watching the combined fleet conduct post-battle operations with something approaching professional competence. "Admiral," Queen Lysara's voice came over the communication system from her flagship Crystal Dawn. "I believe we've created something unprecedented." "What's that, Your Majesty?" "A military force that's both completely unpredictable and absolutely reliable. Our enemies will never know what we're going to do next, but they can count on the fact that we'll do it better than anyone thought possible." Morrison nodded thoughtfully as he watched a human engineering crew teach their Zephyrian counterparts how to repair battle damage using nothing but spare parts and creative cursing. "You know," he said, "I think the galaxy just got a lot more interesting." And, in the depths of space, where the Void Swarm plotted their return, ancient minds that had consumed entire civilizations began to experience something they had never known in their eons of existence: uncertainty. They had learned to adapt to any military strategy, any technology, any tactical innovation. But, how do you adapt to a galaxy that has learned to fight like humans while thinking like everyone else? For the first time in their species' history, the Devourers began to wonder if perhaps there were some battles that weren't worth fighting. But that, as Admiral Morrison would have said with his characteristic grin, was a problem for another day. The galaxy had learned to fight back, and the universe would never be the same.